Hello, my name is Michael War and I'll be presenting today's video on the stair and railing tools. These were introduced in Pt1 and this video is designed to build upon some of the basic concepts learned in the upgrade training webinar number 3. So if you haven't already viewed that, I advise that you have a quick look at it before proceeding. In this video, we'll have a look at the user interface and some of the settings behind the stair tool, how to set it up and what each setting does. In the second part, we'll be going through some drawing concepts and drawing basics and some applications derived from real-world experiences. Then we'll have a look at the railing tool and its interface, and then how to draw with it, how to edit it, and I will also attach it to some stairs and we'll show you the associative nature of it. So let's get stuck in. The stair tool and the railing tool is arranged in a tree and branch system. So we start off at the trunk of the tree and we have the basic things, so the structure and the finishes, and then how it looks on the floor plan. And then underneath finishes, for example, well, we have risers and treads, and then in that we might want to get a little bit more specific, and that's where we can add accessories. So for the treads, we might select the tread material and the profile of the tread. But then we can also add something like a non-slip accessory over the top. So you can see that we start from the trunk, select finishes, and we get more and more specific. And it's hierarchical. These elements at the back here, they're called subcomponents of these components, which are subcomponents of that component, which is a subcomponent of the whole system. So let's have a look at the graphical user interface, and we'll double click on the stair tool to access this. Now, if I double click on the stair tool without having a stair selected, I'm going to be setting up what's called the default settings for that stair. So every time going forward, the stair will have the settings which correspond to what I set up now. If I cancel out of that and then highlight an existing stair and click on the settings, you can see that we've got the stair selection settings. So that's going to be changing the properties of the stair that we've got selected. Let's go back into the default settings and we'll have a look. So if we collapse down these menus, you can see that we've got the stair as a whole, then we've got the branches, and then we've got the components and the subcomponents, and we've got the various specifics in the settings dialog here. If we go back up to the stair, you can see at the top here I've got my favorites. And these are just graphical representations of the settings implied here. They don't actually reflect pre-made stairs, they're more settings. And by that I mean if I double click here on this stair and try and draw it, I can still draw a stair the way I want it, like with an L bend or a U-shaped stair. It doesn't have to look like this straight linear stair, but it will have the same structure and the same finishes and the same accessories. We'll talk about favorites a little bit later on, but I just want to focus first of all on this main window. So as described, this section of the tutorial will be focusing on the settings and what they do. And I plan on going through each one of these sequentially to show you what each setting does and how to use it. So we're going to start off at the trunk, the stair. This is the culmination of the settings below. That's why when we click up here we see a favorite encompassing the entire stair, and if I hold down Shift I get the 2D preview. With stairs, in ArchiCAD 21, not only are they linked to a home story, but they also have a top story link. That means that if the floor-to-floor heights change, the story changes, for example, the whole stair will grow or shrink to adjust by removing treads or adding treads up to the limits bound by the rules. With ArchiCAD, one of the best things about the interface is that if you enter a value in like this, you can see that the graphics change. And I found that you can really learn a lot just by having a look at how these little graphics change to suit. Let's go minus 100, or minus 1000 now, and you can see that the stair is now shrinking. Well, it's not shrinking, it's now below this plane. These planes, they represent the home stories. I'll say minus 1000 now, and you can see the difference. This number here represents the entire length, floor to floor, of the stair. And this number below us represents its elevation to a reference level. Here we've got it to Project 0, which is the same as sea level at the moment and current story because we're on the ground floor and we haven't set up an altitude yet. It'll be the same for the first reference level and the second reference level because these values haven't been determined. Moving across, we've got these two little buttons here. Here, we can decide whether or not we want to start with a tread or start with a riser. And if we zoom in again, you can see how the structure might connect to an existing slab. The next button across shows us an option to either end the stair with a tread or end the stair with a riser. Across we have the width of each flight. It's called the stair width value, the number of risers, the riser height, and the going depth. So, if we add a value here, you can see that these values automatically change. We can also see that the 2 times riser plus going is 690, which is approaching our maximum value for this rule. We'll talk about rules in just a moment, but I want to show you that we can start to make manual changes here, or we can let ArchiCAD handle this. These numbers are all determined by the rules that you have in place. Rules are like bounding units, which only apply if a tick is in the tick box here. So, our riser height must be between this minimum value and the maximum value. There are other rules available to us in ArchiCAD, and we can add these into the stair tool. Let's click OK and click on Options, Project Preferences, and then Stair Rules and Standards. You can see that any rule that has an eyeball next to it will be added in to the stair settings. At the moment, we've only got the top 3 selected. But if I want to add stair pitch in, I can click OK now. We'll double click on our stair tool to bring up our settings again. And you can see that stair pitch is now available to us. And by default, it's turned off, but I can turn it on. So we can have a minimum degrees and a maximum degrees specified for the pitch of the stair. If we want to lock some of the values, especially for the the going depth, we just click lock here, and you can specify manually the width of the stair. You can also specify the riser angle, so we can have slanted risers. Below that, you're talking about the turning types when you draw a landing or a turn in the stair. First option is just an automatic landing, so there's no risers in it. The next one across is a winder with equal angles. And if we want to adjust some of the settings, we can put them in here. We can specify a fixed number of goings or an optimum going width, and this is a value determined by ArchiCAD. We can have a maximum number of goings and specify that's 4, or a fixed number of goings. And then you can talk about the minimum riser offsets, and this can be in terms of a number of goings, or it can be at the model unit, which is in this case millimeters. Now, goings is just another word for tread. It's just the ArchiCAD word for tread. We can also fix this number so that it's not variable. The previous option was a minimum riser offset, and now we've got a fixed riser offset, meaning that we must have this number. We must have a riser offset of 0 mils. Or, with minimum riser offset, we're going to have a riser offset greater than 0, or greater than 100. Let's delete that, and we'll go on to the next option. And this is the turning type with equal winders. Equal goings. We can have a winder type from a single point, 2 points. You can have an auxiliary walking line or a principal line. And you can choose to have a curved walking line or a more orthogonal walking line. Now, all this sounds quite complicated, and that's because this stair tool is engineered to work across multiple countries with different regulations and stairs. And if you want to know a little bit more about how these systems work, just click on this button here and it takes you to a live ArchiCAD website in the Help Center. And it has these really useful GIFs that show you the drawing methods of the stair. And how the stairs are calculated. Baseline, which is the last option here, is kind of like the reference line for the stair. If the baseline is on this side, then that means that the stair is extruded from this point and the rest of the stair is below the line. You can have the baseline in the middle or baseline at the bottom. That's up to you. And if you choose one of these lateral options, you can specify an offset distance from the edge of the stair. Now, below, we have the classifications and properties. This is more of a BIM thing, and it's a little bit useful if you're scheduling out some things. But as long as the stair is classified as a stair, it'll be seen as a stair in the schedule. And the properties will correspond to what you'd expect to see from the stair, or from a stair in a BIM model. Now the next part of this video, we're going to talk about structure and how that relates to the stair as a whole. So we've set up some of the basic rules here. We've got some of these distances, and these are referencing the BCA. Now we're going to look at the underlying structure which supports the stair. This is only going to talk about the actual support of the stair. It's not going to talk about what's on top of the stair. Okay, we covered that in finishes. So if I click on finishes, for example, you can see that now we're talking about the top surface here with the grooves here for non-slip. Rather, if I click on this, that on the structure tab, that section of the stair is actually translucent. Now the structure tab can be expanded to show that we're talking either about the flight, which is the section of the stair that has actual steps, or the landing, which is the flat section of the stair. Now if I click on structure here, I can choose between different types of structure available to us currently in ArchiCAD. And we can have different types of structure for the stair components. Let's start by having a look at some of the options available to us with the monolithic selected. With monolithic, we can have an equal offset from a stair. This is the structure, and we get a smooth bottom. We can define that offset here. You can also have steps, a stepped like structure. You can define the thickness and the width of the structure here, or a variable structure with a minimum and a maximum value. So let's say 300. You can see the change is quite apparent there. We can have a look at that in elevation. Or we can have a monolithic option. Below that, in the component settings, this is where we talk about the materiality and the 2D appearance of that particular element in section and elevation only. Now, below that, this tab's actually quite important. This is about how the flights should connect to the landings or to the extra slabs around the stair. So if I click at the bottom, we're talking about how the stair should be anchored to the ground. And at the moment, the default is the horizontal cut, but we can make it a vertical cut. And you can see immediately the change here. And if we go to elevation, change there. We can have a vertical plus horizontal cut. Something with a bearing nib, or a vertical connection. Now, when we were cycling through these options here were changing. if we start with the vertical cut, you can see that I have to specify a dx value. Well, in this diagram, we've got dx being the end of the tread, and a positive value or a negative value. So if I type in, say, -400, you see what happens here? Or if I type in 100 there, can you see how that affects our stair? And depending on the option that you choose, you'll have different values here to fill in. It's just really important that you look at the value and find its corresponding setting. For example, here is CY, so this number defines this value here for the bearing nib. The landing works almost the same way. You specify the thickness of the landing, materiality, and how it should look in section, and by default these are usually all set up for you if you're using the Australian template. You can add draining to the landing, and you can also do this to the flight. However, a limitation of this currently is that draining can only be on one side of the stair. Draining just means that you're going to add a flat section without finish to the stair. Let's take one step back, and I want to show you that when I select a different structure here, I get different options here. So if I select beam, you can see that we've got beam here. If I select cantilevered, we've got a cantilevered flight and a beam landing still. So I can have any combination here. We can also add stringers to this selection, and you can see that I've now got an option to define stringers. Don't worry too much about the materiality, we can fix that a little bit later. Let's now have a look at the options available to us under beam. If I click on beam flight here, the first option is talking about whether we want a straight beam or a stepped beam. The second option here defines the type of beam. So flight beam 21 is the default setting, and this just lets us define a standard shape. We can define a certain number of beams to work for us. We've got a few extra things that we can add in to make this look more realistic, such as tread plates, secondary supports. We'll have a look at this in 3D. Keeping in mind that we're still in the structure part of this tutorial, and this glass representation for the treads, they're invisible at the moment. We can add end plates at the top, and you can define the type of plate that you would like. And we can see that here in this drawing, or in elevation here, and whether or not we want that tread plate to follow the beam or be perpendicular. There's a few extra settings. And we can have an open stringer system, which works very much like this. And usually this sits in the middle. And we define a width. Now I know that my stair is about 1,200, so if I type in that, I have an open stringer which is the width of the stair. Now we can have this at 900, and we can say that the beam position should be 450, which is halfway off from the center line, or maybe the right hand side, or the left hand side. we go, and we can isolate the structure to the left-hand side of the stair. You can also change the anchor point. Like so. There's a few extra settings, and we covered this off in the previous section with the flight beam. And the last option is profiled flight beam. So in ArchiCAD 21, GDL now can detect profiles that you draw in the complex profile tool. This means that if you draw the profile of a beam that you'd like to use as structure in the stair, you can now use that by drawing it in complex profile and then importing it into the stair tool. Simply just select profiled beam, and you can select your profile here. Now the reason why this section hasn't been changing so far is because that's actually to do with the landing. So I'd have to do the same by clicking on the landing section and changing that to the profiled beam. And then changing that to be the same profile. And there we are. You might not be happy with that connection, so we'd go into the support connection and might choose something more appropriate, like bisector, for example, and that should clear that up. And we'll do the same here. And we've got the C-section lipped there, and I want that to be the same. Now, we don't have a turning here, but we could specify that a little bit more. We could say that there should be 2 beams there. And we can work through the settings. So you can move them about inside the landing. Okay, we're going to move on, and we'll have a look at the cantilevered options now. So the cantilevered flight block is the default setting, and the first option here allows you to define the thickness of this block, which should be anchored into the wall. You can change the anchor point from left to right or both sides, and you can configure the wall fixing and the dimensions for the wall fixing here. You can also remove the last one and remove the top one if you'd like to. There are a few different options for the cantilever style, so it can be a bracket style. And again, there's a few extra settings here that you can define. Most of these are quite self-explanatory. Again, the important thing here is to look at the graphic, and that looks like the actual wall fixing part. So this section here that bolts onto this concrete portion. Just turn it off, and you can see what we're changing. You can see that I've made that end plate quite large. You can also have a profile, and I can tell that it's a profile straight away from the icon in the bottom right hand corner. In which case, if I choose that, I just have to choose the correct profile from this list. Some more common stair types is a metal pan, so we click that. We can define a lot of the settings here, so the thickness of the steel, the thickness of the concrete. Some of these are grayed out because of other settings. There's the metal plate option. You can define the type of profile that you'd like. And the materiality. And then a last one, this is brand new in a recent library update. You can add rods in. These just allow us to have metal beams that support the finishes. The last option is stringers, and this works very similar to beams. When we click on the stringers option, we determine our stringer. You can have a stringer with supports. You can have a profiled stringer, or a profiled stringer with supports, or just the flight stringer, and that acts like just a normal beam. So let's double click on this guy. And then you can add in a secondary support and choose the type of support. Again, that's a brand new thing in the latest version of ArchiCAD with the latest updates. Okay, let's clean up that junction there. Might want more of a bisector. And there we go. Something a little bit different. In the next section, we're going to talk about finishes, but before we move on, I just wanted to explain to you that you can also turn structure off altogether so that you're just left to define the finish. This is quite handy if you're working with custom stairs, because while the structure is mostly immovable and you're locked to this type of structure type, with finishes you can make these surfaces as thick as you want and you can move them about like you would a slab. So you can create some really interesting stair types. So for example, let's click here and start to draw that stair out. We'll click on the stair and we'll click edit. And now I can move this out. And in the tread settings, we can make this quite thick. Now let's highlight this and we will show this selection in 3D. And you can see what we've done. The one stair that we've made thick is selected. So in this way we can start to draw out some quite interesting odd shaped stairs, design them, and it still looks like they've got a substantial amount of structure underneath to hold the stair up. So I'm just going to exit out of edit mode and we'll talk a little bit more about edit mode a little bit later on. And we'll go back into the stair default settings. Now, as previously explained, the finishes, these are what is applied, well, this is what is applied to the stair structure. If I expand this, we can see that we've got two options here, tread and riser. And we also have the option to turn finish off completely. If I want a different finish on the landings and on the flight, I can untick this box, and now I can choose a finish for the, or turn finishes on and off for the flights, and on and off for the risers. And we can have different materials as well. And as I work through this, you can see here in these options, extra branches growing out, ready for settings that I can make. However, if we want uniform finishes on flights and landings, I just click that, and now I just have to talk about treads and risers. So let's start off by talking about treads. With treads, the first option is always about what type of tread you want. There's a couple of different options. The built-in tread starts off quite basic. Okay, it's just a block. You don't really have much control over it. You can choose the material, but there's no real fancy settings. The next one's quite interesting because this is the profile tread. By that, I mean that you actually draw what you want to see in cross-section, and ArchiCAD will extrude it out into a stair. And you draw that in the complex profile tool. You can see here we've got many different profiles. So there's one. And if I go back up, we can see the result of that. This GDL box doesn't quite update when we make decisions about how we want to design our stairs. So you can see I'm always referencing back to the finish section for input. Now the first section here talks about the style, so we choose the type of tread that we want, or the profile in this case. The second one is about adding accessories. So we can add a stair edge protection with non-slip board, or you can add a specific profile. So let's have a look at what this might look like. There's two now, so let's take a step back and see what this looks like. You can see the option here. Might simplify this a little bit so that you get a better idea about our stair. And you can see the options that we're adding here. And you can just build it up. The last tab is just the representation in 3D and the resolution. So if you find that your curves aren't so curved, or in fact they're segmented, just increase the number here. Tread 21 is one of the default treads in ArchiCAD. And we can add a few extra details in here, so we can talk about milled recesses and the number of milled recesses. So let's go up there. You can see that there's now 4 milled recesses here. And they can be distributed. Like so. Again, we're looking at the graphics to tell us what these milled recesses are doing and where they're placed. You can adjust the thickness, the recess in, and the distribution of them. Again, you'll also get tooltips if you hover your cursor over the top. We can add in a non-slip accessory. So at the moment you can see that this stair previews actually already got a non-slip accessory. And that can be in the form of these bands or just a wraparound edge protection. And if it's a wraparound edge protection, you can define how it should look. There's the result there. And then last, there's the tread with profiled accessory. So this is a new part in the new library update. And we can have a raised strip if we wanted to. We can add in milled recesses. So many of the same functionality. We can add in a non-slip accessory. This time around, the non-slip accessory can also be a custom profile. And again, there's our little complex profile symbol. So if you have a particular complex profile that you want, just draw it and ArchiCAD will extrude it. Now, you can see that there's actually quite a lot of settings here, and it can be a bit confusing. So what you can do is just add to a favorite settings that you want to associate with the treads. Or we can just create a new favorite. Simply make your settings, click on the favorite button, and then click this little star button with the plus sign next to it. Give your favorite a name, and you're away. If you want to redefine a favorite, simply select it, and then click redefine, followed by apply. Let's have a look at the riser options now. We've got 3 options here. There's the built-in riser. We'll double click to activate that, and this is pretty much just straight geometry. We can have a profiled riser, whereby we draw the cross section in the complex profile tool, and that's extruded around. And you can select the profile here. Or riser 21, which allows you to have a little reveal. Now we'll stop this section here because that kind of covers most of the GUI. In the next part, we talk about the 2D appearance of the stair in plan.